Uh, shall we start, sir? It's 11:40, and I think I should begin. Uh, Hello, everybody. I must formally welcome Professor P.K. Basant. He is a professor of early Indian history at Jamia Millia Islamia University. Thank you, Professor Basant, for joining us, and I welcome you to this official course. Professor P.K. Basant, as I said, is a professor of early Indian history at Jamia Millia Islamia University. He is a brilliant scholar and a wonderful teacher. He is loved, admired, and adored um, by his students, by his colleagues, for obvious reasons, for his commitment and for his dedication to make learning and education not only democratic, but accessible to those who are unfortunately out of the pale in our system. Professor Basant completed his PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Uh, he, for a very short period of time, taught at Delhi University till 1989. And then he went on to join the Department of History and Culture, Jamia Millia Islamia, in 1989, where he is currently a professor. Uh, he, to my mind, and as I know him, he's been my teacher. One of the major contributions that Professor P.K. Basant has made, not just to the field of scholarship, historical scholarship, but largely to the field of education, is his association and his long association with an initiative called Eklavya. This was an initiative began somewhere in the 90s, I believe, in Madhya Pradesh. And the idea was to make learning, as I said, more democratic, more enjoyable, and involve students in the way in which they could also explore their environment, their social and their natural environment, and the students were made to learn from their own experiences. So it was some kind of a shift in pedagogy where they introduced something called learner-centered philosophy of teaching. They let the students, kids, learn from their own natural and social environment. So the initiative began in Madhya Pradesh with the government school children because they were the most marginalized. And initially, the scientists were involved, but then gradually more and more people started coming in and joining the initiative. So did Professor P.K. Basant and many other economists and sociologists. Their idea was to not only prepare the textbooks, but rather create an environment of learning in the government school institutions where the students may be encouraged to learn from their own experiences, their own mistakes. And the textbook, the burden of the textbook should not be so heavy on them that they could not, or they would not, just be able to get out of that pressure. So that was a very, very important initiative that was that actually started in the 1990s, and it's still very relevant. Professor P.K. Basant has been regularly, if not regularly, then occasionally, of course, he has been writing in the English newspapers, in the Hindi newspapers, for the English and Hindi magazines. As I said, that he is fluent in both Hindi and English. He's a good scholar of Sanskrit language. So if you look at some of the pieces that he has written over the years, you will realize the very unique way of looking at the past and making it accessible to the people in the present. So the real sense of some kind of an interaction of the past with the present is very much visible in his writings, in his approach, and in his conversation in and outside the classroom. I initially mentioned that he has been a wonderful scholar as well. He very recently received the Fulbright Fellowship to visit the University of Virginia, where he worked in the Department of Religious Studies in 2018 and 19. With this very brief note, I should now request Professor P.K. Basant sir to begin his talk. And again, thank you once again for joining us and agreeing to talk to us about some of the issues that concern all of us. Thank you very much, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Danish Moin, and thank you, Ikram, for inviting me. And especially Ikram for being so generous with his comments about me. It worries me because it also puts a burden of expectations, which probably will be difficult to handle. And he especially talked about the Eklavya experience in Madhya Pradesh. The focus was entirely on what is called dialogic learning, meaning that the students spoke as much as the teachers. Now, here is a thing that I'm doing, which is exactly the opposite of that, because this technology is wonderful, but it also, in some ways, creates monologues. So just before the talk began, I asked Ikram, I call him by that name because he has been my student, and I prefer each one of us to call us by our names only, whether I could start with a question. You know, the theme that we have today in mind is called Why Study Humanities? Obviously, I'm trying to put it as a contrast to the field of what is called science. So what we will do is to start with a notion of what is science and how historians look at it, and then move on to the sphere of what is called humanities so that we are able to get a larger picture. But I thought that maybe, history as a discipline, in some universities, it's considered part of humanities. In other universities, it's considered part of so-called social science. So we are somewhere between and betwixt science and humanities. Maybe this will give us a vantage point to assess the idea of science, to assess the idea of social science, and also to understand the importance of humanities. So I wanted to put one question across to all of you, but I'll expect only 4 or 5 responses. And that is, Ikram told me that he will pass it on to you, and it should be immediate answers. My question is, or rather a comment is, which I feel is a wrong comment, but you have to tell me why it's incorrect or wrong. The question is simply, or as I said, the comment that Babur won the Battle of Panipat because God wanted it. Now you have to tell me whether I'm wrong or right. If I am wrong, you have to tell me why am I wrong. Yes, Ikram, if that would
Yeah,
help.
please raise your hand if you want to respond. Yes, we've got one hand. Yes, Mehboob Pasha. You have to unmute Mehboob Pasha.
We can't believe in divine intervention in Babur's victory. We all know that it is because of superior technology which Babur had, and that brought him a victory, and the inferior war technology which the Delhi Sultans had. So belief in God, divine providentialism does not work here.
But you see, this will lead us to a further question. Let's say, could Babur have won the battle of Panipat if God didn't want it?
But there may be another question that where does God exist?
You have to tell me.
Where does God exist? It is only a belief that God exists.
Okay, we'll take Siddesh. Siddesh, you want to respond? Yes, go ahead. Siddesh, we can't hear you.
Now, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Mic was muted. Okay. In Vedic text, we find one line, sir. Tena vina nachalati trunamapi. So that means without God's will, a single grass cannot move. That is the meaning. And in one of the history definitions, we find that it is the determination of God of the things which goes around the world. That means not the world, universe. So in that way we can come to some point that Babar tried his level best to win the war, and God supported him. That is what my opinion, sir. So 99% of effort, human effort, and 1% of God's support. That is the thing we can expect in everybody's life, knowingly or unknowingly. So there is a role of power, whether we can name it as God or whatever it may be. Well, it may be a Christ, or it may be Krishna, it may be Allah, whatever it may be. But there is a power which controls whole universe behind everybody's life. That is what my opinion, sir.
Thank you, Siddesh. As you rightly pointed out, that not a leaf moves without God's, will as such. But if we say that, the question becomes more complicated in the sense that then we are saying, is there anything like a human will? Meaning, am I giving this lecture to you because God wants it? Are you responding to my question because God wants it? Everything that is happening because God wants it. Somebody kills someone because God wants it. A terrorist blows a mosque or a temple because God wants it. And if God wants it, in that case, we don't need law courts and such things, because who are we to judge who has done the right thing? Because everyone is just following the wishes of God. So what do we do?
No, we can't put the blame on the God for our bad things, sir, because it is the human mind which decides to do the things, but there also should be a logic behind the deeds what we do, whether it is wrong or right, whether it affects others or not. It is the human mind to decide it. But the thing what I said earlier, there is a power and which controls whole universe. So that is what my opinion, sir. But that does not mean that each and every person's deeds are controlled by the God.
Okay, so think about it. You see, as you rightly pointed out, and the issue is that, if you were to read Babar's autobiography, he also says that, if you read about Battle of Panipat, he very clearly says, by the grace of God, I won the Battle of Panipat.
Yes, sir.
So our sources are also saying, like historians are dependent on sources. Our sources are very clearly saying that he won the Battle of Panipat because of God's grace. But if you were to write this answer in an examination hall today, that Babur won the Battle of Panipat because God wanted it, I don't think you are going to score very highly. Maybe a teacher like you who is very generous might give some marks, but I don't think, if I were to write in my examination hall just one line, that Babur won the Battle of Panipat because God wanted it. That solves all our problems, except that we historians wouldn't have this, these jobs left for us, because, if everything is something that God wanted, then there's not much scope left for any other kind of discussion.
So that is what I told, sir. In the beginning, I told it is 99% of human effort and 1% of the support from the God.
Yeah, I know. I distrust mathematics, so I didn't take it whether it's 98% or 97% or 3% or 2%. But when we think of God as somebody who is omnipotent and omnipresent.
Yeah.
भगवान सब जगह है और सर्वशक्तिमान है.
Yes.
फिर हमारे लिए, इंसानों के लिए या किसी भी दूसरे जानवर के लिए कुछ करने का स्कोप नहीं बच जाता है. भगवान जो चाहेंगे वही होगा. That's what our Vedas say. तो फिर जो है ये कहना कि मैं कुछ कर रहा हूँ वो बिना भगवान के चाहे कर रहा हूँ, it becomes very difficult to sustain as an argument. Now, one of the things that happened post-Renaissance, and that's important as a historical point, is that the explanation for anything and everything was removed from the sphere of God. It was brought into the sphere of human beings. So they said the center of universe is no longer God, it's human beings as such, or to be more precise, man, because Renaissance people didn't bother about women at all. And so explanations started flowing out of this new form of understanding where everything was explained, every discipline was explained in terms of activities of human beings. So it's not exactly a question about whether there is a God or not. The issue is that somehow there has been a change in our notion of God. God was not only at the center of everything in the earlier world, he was very, very active. He could hurl mace to kill bad people. He could create pathways in mid-ocean. Nowadays, God is far more remote. No newspaper claims that, coronavirus represents the wrath of God, or that God sent tsunami, or that an earthquake was caused by God's anger. Somehow, God has been crossed out from our scheme of explanations. Now, we still have to ask, how do we decide what is correct and what is incorrect? What is true, what is false? If you look at tradition, and by tradition I mean all the major religious traditions, they would have a notion of truth, and they would say, how is truth decided? Number one, जो आसमानी किताबें हैं उनमें जो लिखा हुआ है वो सत्य है, सच है. लेकिन फिर कहा गया कि बहुत सारी बातें आसमानी किताबों में नहीं लिखी हुई हैं. फिर क्या किया जाए? Number two, we have this notion of what is called स्मृति. स्मृति में ये तमाम आपको रामायण, महाभारत, इस तरह के पुराण वगैरह ग्रंथ आते हैं. And these texts, if they say something, that is true. So this kind of took care of a very large variety of things as such. For the Mahabharata, they say that which is not there in Mahabharata is nowhere to be found. So the assumption was that if something is not to be found in Mahabharata, You cannot find it anywhere, which means everything was there in Mahabharata. Yet, people discovered that there were many things that were not in Mahabharata. So then, how do we decide the truth value of a certain happening or an event? And then they said, okay, if a knowledgeable man of good conduct, I'm talking about the Brahmin tradition with which I'm more familiar, but I also know that probably these are the things which are also similar to other traditions. So they said that a knowledgeable man of good conduct, if he says that this is correct, this is true, it's true. Now, in Indian tradition, a knowledgeable man of good conduct invariably turned out to be a Brahmin. So these were the 3-4 ways in which the truth value of a statement was examined. Now comes what is called modernity. And you realize that our categories of explanation are very, very different. As I pointed out, God has been crossed out of this scheme of explanations. Nobody today, whether for explaining an event of history or for explaining anything that is happening around us, uses God as an explanation. Some people do, but normally they don't. I mean, the things that we have, the books we are familiar with, the newspaper, the mass media, or things that we read on computers or in our WhatsApp explanations, God is kept away from them. God might be hanging around with some ideas, but he is not used as an explanation in the modern context. But what is very strange is probably that the most important thing that is used for explaining the truth value of a statement is what can be called dead objects in laboratory. They will take a piece of a stone, they will take a gas, they will take a liquid, and they will conduct certain experiments in laboratory, and they would say that if it's proved in a laboratory, then probably this is true. But they also have this fascinating condition, which was concretized in the idea of what is called verifiability and falsifiability. They said that a thing is true if it can be verified in different places by different people, and if the results are same, we say that this is true. But they said it cannot be infinitely true. They said nothing can be finally verified. Meaning that if I say that swans are white, we go on examining and seeing whether the swans are white. Maybe we have counted about 1 million swans and they all turn out to be white. And we say that this is a provisional truth that swans are white. But maybe after 1 million, we find a swan that is black. And then they would say our thesis collapses because we have been proved wrong. So they would say that the statement has to be modified and changed. Similarly, in the field of science, there is this notion of what is called turnover ontology, meaning that in the field of science, we try to break everything down to small atoms. And see how they interlink. In history, we break everything down to quote unquote small facts and see how they connect with various other kinds of facts that we have discovered in our researches. And based on that, we come to certain conclusions. But if we find that our facts are not matching the conclusions drawn by other scholars, we give up that explanation. We say that, okay, the explanation that was given in 1950s by, say, a great scholar like, say, R.C. Mazumdar was not correct, because some of the explanations do not seem to be supported by these elementary facts. Or we say that explanation given by Professor Doc D.D. Koshambi is not correct because some explanations provided by him do not seem to match facts. So we are always examining our ideas and changing our ideas. So they would say that falsifiability is the greatest marker of scientific thinking. Now, this is exact opposite of earlier ways of thinking, religious ways of thinking, where the assumption was that somebody has discovered the truth, and that truth cannot be questioned. If I were to say today that the Vedas are incorrect, I will be in a lot of trouble. Or if I were to say that the Quran is incorrect, I'll be in a lot of trouble. But if I were to say that Einstein's theory of relativity is incorrect, nobody is going to kill me for that as such. They will probably try and examine it and say, no, there are these examples which seem to suggest that Einstein's theory of relativity is wrong, is right. And we know, for example, we know today that there were these two major streams of study in the field of science that are trying to understand the world. One starts with people like Einstein, who looked at the universe as a unit and tried to explain it. There was this other body of knowledge which was created by people like Niels Bohr, who started with the study of atoms and subatomic particles. They were also trying to understand the universe. Now, the understanding created by study of subatomic particles and the study and the knowledge created by the study of universe as a whole, they do not seem to come to similar conclusions. One of them is likely to be proved incorrect. But when it's proved incorrect, it doesn't lead people who have been proved incorrect to say, okay, from today onwards, we are picking up guns and killing all those people who are going to tell us that we are incorrect. Because, as I said, falsifiability is the first characteristic of modern science, and they continuously update their knowledge. Now, these were things that I learned rather late, but when I learned it in my classrooms, I was stunned, and I accepted these explanations. But if I accepted these explanations, this too is incorrect. Science is a method. If I replaced my ideas with a new set of ideas without examining them, I was being unscientific. So it's not that we accept one set of explanations by another. We examine those ideas and accept them only if we find that through our methods of examining, they are being proved correct. So the study of history that you are conducting is very clearly a modern discipline. That is how you keep changing your understanding of history, understanding of past. And in that sense, it's different from earlier ways of chronicling, meaning that there has been a lot of criticism of modern writings of history. Many people say that the British, they wrote a wrong history. Others say the Marxists wrote a wrong history. There are all kinds of critiques of all these things as such. But what is important is that if we are saying something of that kind, we have to come out with alternative set of information and alternative set of explanations. If we don't, it's useless. But what is also important is to remember that those who said that these were wrong kinds of histories, they did not go back to the kind of writing that was done, say, in the Puranas, or to the writing that was done by people like Barney. They were also writing some kind of a account of the past. But those accounts were not accepted because their assumptions, their methods were very different from our assumptions, our methods. We are a product of modernity. Our discipline is a product of modernity, where we have been sensitized to chaos theory, to things like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And so we have been tuned to the idea that our researches are going to modify the understanding that existed earlier. All of you are researchers, all of you are asking questions, looking for answers. Now, it's possible that you find an answer which might be proved incorrect after 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But that is the beauty of modern knowledge. However, now I have been praising science because my idea was not to say that science is completely useless. But I now want to shift to the idea of humanities, which seems to be playing second fiddle, and many disciplines of humanities tried very hard to prove that they were science. As you know, science has got immense prestige. So various disciplines, in fact, various people who are, talking about, the Vedas being right, or Purans being right, or Quran being right, they also try to prove that they are very scientific. Because science has got so much of prestige that nobody has been left unaffected. But I want to tell you and talk about the limits of science in some ways. The science that we face in our day-to-day life seems to have a lot of arrogance about it. And that is what I wish to talk about. See, some scientists have said, again, those who have been working on uncertainty principle and all that, is that if you look at the knowledge that science has created, there are things like known unknowns. For example, we know about the black holes. Black holes, we know that there is something called black hole, but we know very little about what happens inside black holes. How does the black hole function? Whether the laws of science that we have formulated, whether any of them would have any validity in the world of black holes. Now, these are known unknowns. But they said there is another category, which they say is unknowable unknown. This is an unknown part, which is also an unknowable part. For example, if we were to ask, does the universe have a boundary? Now, that seems very strange. In science, they do talk about universe having a boundary. But the problem is that if it has a boundary, what lies beyond that? Now, so far in the field of science, they would say this is unknowable unknown. Now, we realize that science and scientific studies showed various kinds of limits to scientific understanding that probably is not very popular in the day-to-day life. So we should talk about it. For example, there was this philosopher called Bertrand Russell and another philosopher called Alfred Whitehead. They tried to create a book where mathematics could be understood by basic axioms, but they abandoned it at some point because they realized that there are conjectures that are neither provable nor disprovable, and so there cannot be basic axioms in the field of mathematics. Similarly, there have been talk about what is called the butterfly effect, where it has been pointed out, this was something which was talked about in 1950s and it has become popular, where it was pointed out that the way chaos theory works, it's quite possible that in Moscow, a butterfly flaps its wings and that leads to a storm in New York. Now, because of a variety of factors, the chaos theory says that it's impossible to predict future in precise terms. And that is where we come to the field of humanities, come to the field of literature, where we realize that literature is able to point out that human nature is unpredictable. Why human nature only? If you were to talk about, say, a dog, if you were to kick a dog, it can bite back, it can snarl, it can yelp, it can run away. So we can think of 4 kinds of behavior from a dog that has been hit. And when you think about human beings, there will be any number of forms of behavior that I don't need to go into. But the problem that we face, apart from the reality of science as being located in a field of uncertainty, is that science is characterized by ethical blindness. Meaning that there are very bright and brilliant people who have been discovering a variety of things about the world, which makes life so much more comfortable, which makes it possible for us to be located at great distance and yet to be able to share ideas. But at the same time, there is an ethical blindness in science. I came across this terrible example where when atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a bomb that vaporized about 2 lakh people. This dropping of atom bomb was celebrated. It led to wild celebrations in Los Alamos. These were the people, this place was the place where people had assembled this bomb. So on the one side, 2 lakh people are being killed. And the makers of those bombs think that it's a great scientific achievement. Similarly, probably the greatest challenge that we are facing today is the challenge of a possible ecological catastrophe. we are hearing, like, I stay in Delhi and it's still raining in Delhi. It's very unusual. And people say it has something to do with global warming. Massive floods, water levels rising, which will mean that people who are staying in coastal areas would have to necessarily vacate their homes. They will be without their hearth and home as such. Massive storms, which are, causing massive destruction. All this is happening. But is science aware of it? Of course, scientists are aware of it. But is science able to think about consumerism when it designs a product? Are scientists who are working in a large number of business establishments also thinking that consumerism is the basic cause of ecological catastrophe? They are not. They still think that they can fix everything, that they are omnipotent. But this might end up destroying us as a species. And that is where I think I'll quote from one survivor of Hitler's concentration camp. It says, "I'm a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers. Children poisoned by educated physicians. Infants killed by trained nurses. Women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I'm suspicious of education. My request is, help your students become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more human." Now, this was written by somebody who had suffered immensely, who had lost all his loved ones, and who barely survived concentration camps. And it's in that context that I remember the lines of Nietzsche, who said, "In individuals, insanity is rare." इंसान अकेले जो होते हैं उनमें पागलपन बहुत कम देखा जाता है. But in groups, parties, nations and epochs, it's a rule. लेकिन समुदायों में, पार्टीज में, देशों में और युगों में लगता है कि पागलपन ही एक नियम है और पागल न होना ही एक एक्सेप्शन है. So here are situations for which science does not have answers, or scientists have not shown the kind of involvement that we will expect. The humanities teach us to think about these issues. They are not talking truth. They are talking probabilities. And that is why humanities are subversive. They undermine the claims of all authorities, whether political, religious, or scientific. Excuse me. They are characterized by a form of skepticism. So But they also tell us that human beings have an enormous capacity for deluding ourselves. They also tell us that every single human is unique, different than every other human. And each of us keeps changing in unpredictable ways. Societies we live in also keep changing, in part because of science and technology, but mostly because of many other happenings. So the idea of truth becomes very different in the field of humanities. They would ask questions like, what is wrong? What is right? What is the point of life? Should happiness be our goal? Well, what the hell is happiness? And should happiness be an end in itself, or just a side effect of some other more important goals, like gaining knowledge or reducing suffering? Now, when I'm pointing all this out, I'm pointing out questions that are very different from the idea of truth, from the idea of science. Let's share some good poetry. I'm sure many of you would have come across these poems in some context or other, must have been excited, affected by them, or must have forgotten them. So I wish to share these with you. I'm not telling you the names of the poets. I'm sure you will discover them or you will already know them. Let's go then, you and I. When the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table, let's go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless night in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. There's another poem, just 2 lines of that poem. I'll bring you happy flowers from the mountains, bluebells, dark hazels, and rustic baskets of kisses. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. And here is another one. मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरे महबूब न मांग. I'm not going to read everything because that will take अनगिनत सदियों के तारीख बहिमाना तलिस्म, रेशो अटलस ओ कमखाब ओ बाजार में जिस्म, खाक में लिथड़े हुए खून में नहलाए हुए लौट जाती है इधर को भी नजर क्या कीजिए. अब भी दिलकश है तेरा हुस्न मगर क्या कीजिए, और भी दुख हैं जमाने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वस्ल की राहत के सिवा. Similarly, another poem. कई दिनों तक चूल्हा रोया, चक्की रही उदास, कई दिनों तक कानी कुतिया सोई उनके पास, कई दिनों तक लगी भीत पर छिपकलियों की गश्त, कई दिनों तक चूहों की भी हालत रही शिकस्त. Now, this obviously is a description of famine. And then, when the famine is over, there's another description by the same poet, which says, दाने आए घर के अंदर कई दिनों के बाद, धुआं उठा आंगन से ऊपर कई दिनों के बाद, चमक उठी घर भर की आंखें कई दिनों के बाद, कौवे ने खुजलाई पाखें कई दिनों के बाद. Suddenly, when the poet is talking about चमक उठी घर भर की आंखें कई दिनों के बाद, घर भर includes not only human beings, it also includes the dog, the rat, the lizard, everybody is included. The crow. Similarly, there are just these two lines from a Bengali poet. It says, Kavita tomaye dilam aaj ke chuti. Poetry, I have given you leave today. Khudha rajye prithvi goddamoy. In the kingdom of hunger, there is no poetry on earth. Purnimar chand jano chulshano ruti. The full moon looks like a burnt out roti to me as such. Now, suddenly, each of these poems that I read out to you reads like a completely different experience of life, of love, of hunger, of helplessness. And that is what gives us entry into the idea of what we call human beings. Human beings who are different, human beings about whom at the time when, say, a person like Sir Isaac Newton was discovering various laws of physics, somebody was writing, what piece of work is a man? How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable in action, how like an angel in apprehension, how like a god. So here is this beautiful picture of human beings. I'm sure somebody would have also written human beings as monsters, something that I read out in the beginning. So in the beginning, there was a monster who was trained in science, and it ended with a statement where human beings are like angels. So what Humanities does is to cultivate the spirit of what's called epistemological pluralism, to encourage the art of listening as an integral component of pedagogy. So listening becomes very important. And this is fundamentally different from the ugly practice of blame game, where we start blaming somebody even before we have understood things as such. We need to acquire the courage to break out of this vicious cycle and to see ourselves as seekers and wanderers, continually learning and unlearning with openness, fearlessness, and in a dialogic spirit. As I said, I started with the statement that one of the problems of issues related to talking on computer is that it necessarily turns a lecture into a monologue, into one person speaking, others listening. But I hope to listen to you, because your statements, your questions, and more than your questions, your comments are as important about what I talked about as my speaking. because I'm continuously learning, and I'm sure you all have your worlds of experience which can tell me lots of things. And in the process of your commentary, your questions, your answers, you will also be sharing something with your entire class, which in many ways might prove to be a transformative experience. That is what universities are about. That is what our encounters with personalities like Phule or Ambedkar or Marx are about. We learn by reading about them, something that probably we don't learn through science. So, what I was trying to say was that science is very, very important. It is responsible for a lot of things with which we operate today. But if we were to create a world which is more just, which is able to look at things from the point of view of a marginalized tribesman, from the point of view of every marginalized section in our society, from the point of view of a peasant, from the point of view of a woman, from the point of view of various minorities that inhabit our country. That would be the real learning. And that is why we need humanities. That is why all of us need to continuously refresh ourselves, continuously drink the joys of good poetry, read beautiful stories, and share them with our fellows, because human beings are great storytellers, and I'm told that Indians are among the greatest storytellers. We learn stories and tell stories from our childhood, and we need to continue that storytelling to each other for as long and as many stories as possible. I'll stop here for lots in the hope that there will be a lot of comments and a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
It was indeed very moving,
Thank you,
exciting.
sir.
Uh, I think we'll take some questions, comments. Those of you who want to make comments and ask questions, please raise your hands. Yes, Dr. Charles, go ahead.
First of all, I must congratulate Professor. So many information, but if you could arrange another session also, it would be very good, because lots of information makes us to chew about the subject in a grand manner. I must thank because it is a great boon for the university to arrange such a informative person. So thank you, sir. No questions, because everything is very clear, and you have talked sky as the limit. So we understand the realistic way of dealing the informative ideas, not only for the life, but for the enrichment of the life. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. On behalf of Pondicherry University, I thank you, and hats off to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. We'll go to Dr. Mehboob Pasha.
Sir, hearty congratulations for a wonderful presentation, sir. And before I ask my question, I just would like to narrate to you what had happened in Andhra Pradesh some 10 years ago. There was one chief minister. He had removed one group, HEC, that is History, Economics and Civics combination, from intermediate level, saying that this is an unproductive subject, and thereby meaning that it was not needed to be taught. The logical consequence was that at BA level also history would not be studied. Second, even today, the government of Andhra Pradesh runs Andhra Pradesh residential junior colleges. There you have combinations with mathematics, physics, chemistry, biological science, maths, economics, and commerce, but you don't have combination with history, economics, and civics, thereby meaning that history is an unproductive subject or civics is an unproductive subject, it may not be studied. Then the tragedy was that history was taught by civics lecturers, and the Andhra Pradesh History Congress had to fight a lot, and finally the subject was introduced. The bottom line was that history is an unproductive subject, so it will not be studied at intermediate level. Given this scenario and given the globalized era, how do you see the future of social sciences in India, and especially given the mania for engineering, technology, medicine, and all? So how do you see the future of social sciences today?
See, as far as the future of humanities or social sciences, as you're rightly pointing out, there is this attitude that these are things that are better not taught or studied as such. It's in that sense that I was also pointing out that in some ways, history is subversive. In the sense that you realize that this is very strange, and this is something that all of us should think about. If you were to read European history, in Europe, the principle, after 15th, 16th century, you must have read about Galileo and Giordano Bruno and these people who were the founders of modern scientific tradition. They had to face a lot of, persecution from the church. So the principal struggle there was between the church and the scientists. Somehow, in the case of India, science and the power structures, they seem to be doing very well together. Scientists don't seem to have any problems with anything that's happening in power structures. And somehow, it's always the historians who have to fight the battles, which in the case of Europe was fought by scientists. I don't know why that has happened, because that requires a lot of thinking and probably a lot of research, but that has happened as such. Probably we all need to find our ways. I don't think that I have any solution to what is happening, but the important thing is to impress upon people that we are not producing robots. We are in any given university or institution, attempt is to produce a good human being who has sensitivity, who is able to think about his surroundings. In fact, I remember this was long ago, a Christian father with whom I was doing some work, he told me a beautiful thing. He said, when I die and go to God, God is not going to ask me, what did you do to save the world? God will ask me, what did you do to save your neighbors? So probably we have to make those small efforts. We have to make that effort, meaning that the people, the teachers, the power structures that are around us, we have to try and convince them that humanities and history are very, very important segments of our life, because our behavior, our attitudes are to a large extent defined by our understanding of our past. And if there is no past, I don't know what we will be like as such. So in that sense, I'm not providing you any solutions, because these are obviously huge questions. but I'm providing you some possibilities and ideas about what to do in this kind of a situation. Thank you.
Sir, I just would like to
Yeah.
add something, that there is some
Please.
geographical variation also. Like when we were studying in JNU, from Orissa, number of students were studying sociology. Like from northern India, good number of students were coming to study social sciences. The pathetic situation lies in South India, where these people study more of sciences and neglect social sciences. Say, for example, no department at graduation level has sociology in Andhra Pradesh. You hardly ever found a sociology student coming for higher studies in JNU. I stayed in JNU from 98 to 2005. I did not find even a single student coming from Andhra Pradesh studying in Department of Sociology in JNU. That is the pathetic situation. I think all social scientists must come together to do something about it. Especially in South India, the situation is very pathetic.
That's a fascinating observation. I hadn't thought about it, but the fact that people coming from one area, what are they studying and all that, and you are right. I mean, if you think of the discipline of history in India, you realize that I mean, it's not a comment on anybody who's bad or good as such, but you realize that most of the good professors are coming from Bengal. I mean, if you look at the world of scholarship, you realize that there are very large number of them who are coming from Bengal.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at the world of so-called sciences, you have the South Indian Brahmins who are doing very well in that field as such.
Yes.
So there is some notion of a cultural tradition, some notion of geography, all these things. Again, I mean, this would be a fantastic topic for sociological study as such, why that happens. Because once we do that, it kind of also helps us rectify these errors and mistakes as such. But unfortunately, I mean, you are pointing this out, and I'll keep this in mind. It's a fascinating observation, and probably it will help us think more about these issues. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Any more questions? Please raise your hand.
Basha, there is a professor. There is a professor in sociology department of JNU.
Yeah. Gurram Srinivas. I know Gurram Srinivas. I was talking about students. I was talking about students, Anna.
Oh, Sridhar, do you have any question?
See, there are many things sir has spoken, so I cannot have any question. I was thinking of asking sir about methodological individualism that he is actually focusing on, but sir, I better read sir's writings.
Would you like to say something, sir?
No, actually, I have been more into the older Indian tradition of talking rather than writing more as such. So I haven't written about historical method, because one of the things you realize is that you go into these fields, they are completely untouched. As far as India is concerned, the only recent book that I can think of is by someone called Shashi Bhushan Upadhyay, who's written a book on historiography. But there is no other work, whereas there is so much work on a whole lot of issues, including methodological individualism, that I dare not move into that sphere as such. So for writing, I continue to stick to my specialization of ancient Indian history. But for talking and discussing, I do discuss many of these issues with our listeners as such, commentators as such. So nothing much to say.
Okay, we've got a question from Siddesh. Yes, Siddesh.
It's not a question actually. It's a opinion, I think. As we were listening to the lecture, sir was telling about the this one that refugee from the or survivor from the Nazi or terrorism. So his words were very heart touching, and I was thinking that to create human beings, humanities is needed in the education field, and science, I can't say science can do it. The science can't do it, but it can do. But when we study the science, we very much lean towards the materialistic life, and we neglect the moralistic life and ethics also in the life. In that way, for the current world, what the current world is facing, so many problems in any way. So those are all the byproducts of development of science, I think, because science took place, inventions took place only before 200 or 250 years back. Before that, for many thousands of years, this globe and this world was very much secured. But now we are feeling everywhere insecurity because of this inventions of science, I think. In that way, it is needed that the humanities should be taught very well in the education field in all the levels, I think. So that is what I wanted to say, and thanks for the opportunity, sir.
Thank you, Siddesh. You see, my purpose was not to demean science or not to say that what was existing 250 years ago or 1,000 years ago was very beautiful. There were a lot of problems that all of you know, all of you have studied history. And you know that all those societies, all those times were also times of struggle for a lot of people as such. But, and many people would say that science has been progressive. Now, that's a huge area of debate whether science has been progressive or not. What I was trying to say, and that is what is important. You see, say in Odisha, there is this Gandhamadan movement. There were these hills which are full of one of the metals, and one large company wanted to take that. Now, it was also the habitat of a fairly large number of tribal people as such. And they said, no, this hill is like our God. And we are quite happy as we are. We don't want anything. We don't want anything from you as such. Now, if we are blinded by science, we'll say, what is this? These people are basically blocking the development of science. But we need to have the sensitivity to see why these people want to stay. And probably it's possible that they're right. They are happy. They are not participating in our consumerist world. They are protecting a mountain, protecting a large number of trees, birds, animals, insects. So why should we destroy them simply because we want aluminum? So that is where we have to grow this sensitivity to the marginalized. And what has happened definitely in last 250 years has been that a lot of areas, a lot of people have been marginalized. Not that it didn't exist earlier, but now it exists on a massive scale. So, something that was called development of underdevelopment, but I'm not using those words, but there has been this marginalization of vast populations. And those people have an equal right for justice, equal right for celebration and happiness. And the question is, are we thinking about them? What is it that we are doing about it? And these are questions which scientists don't ask. And that is why probably we are trying to sensitize ourselves as well as sensitize scientists about it. That is why humanities are important. It's very important. Okay.
I think, sir, to add that study of humanities can add human face to the science, I think. We can say it, I think. human face for science is very much needed, sir. That is what my opinion.
Possibly, you're right. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's why they have started ISETs now. As an institutional mechanism, ISETs started to match both Indian Institute of Science Education Research, along with IIT, like on the lines of IITs.
Okay.
They're doing.
Possibly. Yeah.
Okay, I think we should end. But before that, may I make an observation? I was just, when you were talking about how, the challenges that today the humanities as such are facing because of the consumerist culture that has become very strong. I was reminded of the fact that if we could recall, especially the discipline of history, was challenged in the 1930s and in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, largely because of its very rigid methodology in France. And that is when, we witness, with the emergence of sociology and, human anthropology and many new disciplines in France. And then we have historians like Marc Bloch and Lucien Febvre, and then later on Fernand Braudel talking about and sort of reviving the very idea how to study and read past, because they were also very annoyed with the kind of existing research approach. Now, that was a major challenge, but they sort of managed to overcome it. Today, we face a very different kind of challenge. And this challenge, if you look at the flip side of it, it is being facilitated, some would say positively, by the widespread democratization of technology. So everybody has got a mobile phone in their hands. Everything has been, put on websites, available online. You just have to, search something, and then the Wikipedia will show you the whole page about the factual and the detailed explanation of that particular incident. So literally the whole world is in your hand. Now, some would say and argue that we don't need schools and institutions and colleges to teach history anymore, because all the facts are available, different explanations are available. We certainly need maybe a couple of institutions, a good quality number of researchers to continue researching and finding more truths, and then let's make them available to the wider people. Because it is, as you also talked about and Mehboob Pasha also mentioned, it is not productive, it is not feasible, it is not helping us in any way to make our life as human being better. Now, this challenge, if you sort of contrast it with the kind of methodological challenges that we have had, I'm not talking about the postmodern historians who challenged the way the historians or the social scientists understood truth. But this challenge is massive. What do you think about this?
It's a very interesting question, but we have to learn to distinguish between information, knowledge, and wisdom. As you're pointing out, each one of us has got this smartphone, and which has got incredible amounts of information. You just have to push a button and you have the whole of Mahabharata or Puran or Quran or anything that you want as such. That is information. There is a surfeit of information. Now, how does information turn into knowledge? Now, information turns into knowledge when you start seeing various kinds of links between different kinds of information as such. And as historians, you are doing that. As I said, you create or look for atomized facts and then try, and by separating them into different units, you try to connect them and make sense of it. And when you make sense of it also, you say that what I have written is incomplete, is not something that is final. It's not something that's the truth. So that's where we have, effected a break from traditional knowledge. So let's not confuse information and knowledge. And from knowledge, through knowledge, comes wisdom. If you have a certain amount of knowledge, then you try to assimilate these various forms of ideas. And through that, then you start asking metaphysical questions like what is life, what is happiness, what's the meaning of things. That is where wisdom comes, which obviously is very rare. But these three things need to be separated from each other and then thought through. So what we are probably saying, and what most of the people are saying, that all the information is there, is this information, it's just information, it's not knowledge.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for being with us and for this very thought-provoking interaction, I would say. And I hope it must have ignited many more questions among people, but maybe it is because of the time they are not raising their hands. So I leave it there.
It's hunger.
Yeah. But it was very, very moving. I really appreciate the fact that you finally agreed to talk to us about why it is important to study humanities, why humanities, give us a very different sense of the way human interact with each other, the very idea of extreme unpredictability of human beings as such. So I would again would like to thank you and